afternoon to everybody. My name is Jennifer Rodriguez. I am the President and CEO of the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and I am delighted to be with you today and be in this the first day of the BPHL Festival. It also happens to be the first day of Hispanic Heritage Month. So here, Puerto Rico. So I guess maybe that's why they asked me to be in the panel today. I am incredibly happy to be talking about how our organizations working in this diversity and inclusion climate, given all the changes and the environment that we're living in today. And joining me in this conversation is Stephen Bradley, the board chair of the African American Chamber of Commerce for New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Rob Wonderling, president and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia. We know the pandemic, protests, and politics have magnified both the lack of and the need for greater diversity and inclusion in Philadelphia and around the country. And as the majority of population in Philadelphia really made up of diverse people, representing ethnic minorities, we must really go above and beyond to embrace inclusion and diversity. And so today we will be examining what our organizations are doing to create change for the future. So I think one of the ways to really start this is really by giving us a little bit of a context of each of our experiences when it comes to this. And one of the things that when we got together prior to the call or prior to this session, we thought about, what really was that first time in which we became acutely aware that there were some discrepancies and disparities that needed to be dealt with or really paid attention to. And my conversation with Rob Wonderling, I remember I am born and raised in Puerto Rico and came to the U.S. To do my undergraduate work. And my first job was at the National Academy of Sciences, working the Ford Foundation Fellowships for Minorities. And that was the job really required, and the goal of the program was to increase minorities or diverse talent in academia. Because it was viewed at the time, that was the 1990s, as having a dearth of people of color. That is the first time that really became acutely aware that really we needed to work proactively in this space of diversity and inclusion. And so I wonder, Rob, what was that first time in which you realized that this was an area that we really needed to be working on?
Well, like everybody, we all have our own unique journey around issues of race. Even the fancy and sophisticated terms today have confirmed that unconscious bias and equity and inclusion. But in our lifelong journeys, I think we all have moments that then are threaded together to build out a composite awareness of social responsibility, leadership responsibility, our own personal responsibility and behavior. I'm not going to go through a long and lengthy tale because by the end of that, it would probably be more myth than legend. But I do have a couple key moments in time. I distinctly remember in that turbulent summer, 1968-69 timeframe, coming in, and the memorial and funeral services for the assassinated Martin Luther King Jr. were on television. And I was really trying to understand and ask my father why there was no flag draped on his coffin. And of course, because I had remembered had the visions of our president and then his brother being assassinated. And that, for me, really then, thanks to my father and his tutelage, began a longing to understand Martin Luther King in a deep and important way. He was one of my childhood heroes, along with Roberto Clemente, a right fielder for the Pittsburgh Pirates. But I grew up in a very homogeneous, rural Pennsylvania Dutch community in Lebanon County. And so the next moment came with the end of the Vietnam War in the early 70s, we lived very close to a military base, Indiantown Gap, which was one of the primary East Coast points of entry for Vietnamese refugees. And so growing up in a community where I did not interact with Latino, Asian, African American, all of a sudden, literally hundreds of Vietnamese individuals and families became inculcated into our community, our church, our schools, our civic life. And that to me was seminal in my journey, because it really invoked a worldview from a goofy junior high kid. And from then, my professional journey has always been around these issues. And I think this is now the third time I've used journey in these brief remarks, that it is all about walking in the right direction, perhaps getting lost at times, but keep moving forward. And my own social commentary on obligations and responsibilities in this particular moment in time in our collective journey to do the best we can individually and collectively to stamp out systematic racism is that we should not squander this moment in time. We need to be patient in this moment in time. And my prayer throughout the pandemic is to be compassionately patient and not to be judging of others, particularly those in elected roles. No one's ever been through this before, whether you're the president, our mayor, governor, elected officials, et cetera. And every day wake up and not just be in a rhetorical place or a place of hashtag and tweets and characters, but in a place where you're touching the work in a way that makes progress.
Thank you for that. And as a person of color, I know that these conversations can sometimes be, it can be a little bit uncomfortable. But I think we're here amongst friends, and it's great that we're having this conversation today. I'm particularly interested. I was not born in this country, right? I was born in Puerto Rico, in an island, didn't come here until later. But Stephen, as an African American male that has been, born and raised in this country, when was the first time that it became evident to you that this was a matter that really needed to be addressed comprehensively, and it was an important topic to deal with? And do we have him? Stephen? Well, I think what we will do is we will have the conversation with Rob at this moment. Rob, so in terms of diversity and inclusion, we often, when it comes to entrepreneurship, right, there has been a lot of conversation in these days. The pandemic has really brought to the surface this significant disparities in business, in entrepreneurship, in community of color, compared to the mainstream or white community. And much has been said about supplier diversity and access to capital. And I think you and I have been in any number of conversations in the recent past in which we have talked about this. But something that really we should be really paying attention to is really our main streets, our neighborhood commercial corridors. This has become really increasingly evident or important as we enter the 6 months of this pandemic, and the emergency, the fallout has reverberated and is becoming that much more visible for us. Commercial corridors are the life and death of our neighborhoods, and they are rich with diversity in entrepreneurship. I mean, I think this is where we find that we have a lot of people of color really looking for opportunities to create wealth, to contribute back to the economy, to lift their families up from perhaps, poverty or really wanting to give their family a better outlook and better quarters are in peril, and they have been sort of teetering, for a long time. What do you think we should be thinking about when we think about commercial?
Sure, Jennifer. And you just suggested our commercial quarters have been teetering for a long time. Actually, it's been at least 10 years. And statistically, if you look at the city of Philadelphia, between the time of the Great Recession in 2007 and 8 through to pre-pandemic period Q1 this past year, Philadelphia did not take full advantage of a great recovery, particularly when you compare us to other competing cities and other competing metro regions. And where that had been the most pronounced is in our small business community, in particular our Black and brown small business community throughout the neighborhoods of Philadelphia. And that is why when you look at think tank lists, Philadelphia during the last 10 years was always at the bottom in terms of per capita growth. It's also why that 10-year period saw growing inequity among various demographic groups in the city, and particularly non-white demographic groups. And we did some research as part of our neighborhood-based roadmap for growth and inclusive growth public policy agenda, where we took the commercial corridors and we aligned them by councilmatic district on a geographic basis. And we built a dashboard looking at where they stand currently in terms of key economic indices. And the plan is to keep revisiting those indices every so often to see if we're actually growing. By the way, that work was done for us by the expert firm eConsult, and it was the first time we'd ever taken that kind of a granular look and done so through the lens of a legislative district, a city council district. Then the pandemic hit, and from the Federal Reserve to other think tanks, the data is absolutely replete and undeniable that the most battered aspect of our economy are brown and Black enterprises. These are 85 employer less, 50 employer less, 5 employer less. These are the socioeconomic hubs of our neighborhoods in Philadelphia, in the commercial corridor, and through your leadership at your Chamber of Commerce, where you spend so much time working with that segment. And we think that to accelerate any type of economic recovery for the city and the region, there has to be a laser-like focus on these Black and brown enterprises in these commercial corridors. If they are not brought back to life and resuscitated as enterprises, then you will continue to erode and perhaps accelerate the destruction of the social fabric in very unique locales throughout the city. And we all know what the consequences of that will be: increased crime, fear, addiction, et cetera. I will say this, that the pandemic, and I would say particularly since April, May, June timeframe, there seems to be a galvanization of interest around, and about time, since you said this segment's been teetering, and I agree, a galvanization of interest from our federal, state, and local elected officials, from the business community, from large global organizations that see this as such high priority as it relates to an accelerated economic recovery for the city and for the region.
And I think it's great here in the city of Philadelphia. Commercial corridors tend to be, a lot of them are managed by nonprofit organizations and CDCs. We have a number of commercial corridors that also have business improvement districts and such. Those tend to require additional assessments, right? And so oftentimes the question is, what can we do in low-income communities in terms of supporting those corridors that may not have the ability to get these assessments in order to fund strategies? And oftentimes, I'm a city planner by training, and oftentimes I look And I think that there are ways in which we can all come together, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, the philanthropic sector, and really look about how do we break these silos, and how do we really put some really concentrated and coordinated energy, because oftentimes there are programs, there's going to be an anti-graffiti movement. Well, if that anti-graffiti movement is not coming along with technical assistance that supports the businesses to create new storefront improvements, and does not come with additional assistance in terms of marketing and perhaps litter reduction, we're doing things sort of sporadically or not coordinated, and the efforts are not as successful. I think, do we have Stephen Bradley on the line? I hear that he has joined again. So we'll try one more time. So chambers of commerce are really membership organizations. And the tendency is, we serve our members, right? And outside of the membership, the activities that chambers perform, but not necessarily traditionally, that's not necessarily the work of the chamber, right? It's membership organization, you focus on your membership. But what I've seen from the greater chamber, and from the African American chamber, Asian chamber, and certainly ourselves, is that we're taking a broader look, and behaving more like economic development organizations that just purely membership organizations. Can you talk to us a little bit about how the chamber is approaching problems and stepping outside of its traditional membership focus role?
Sure, that's a great question. And maybe I want to step back a click or two for our attendees today. This whole conversation is about eliminating systematic racism. It's through the very narrow but proportionate lens of creating more economic opportunity for minorities and minority enterprises. And I know there's a lot of conversations in a political arena around redistribution of wealth. What we're talking about with a focus on Black and brown enterprises and commercial corridors is not redistribution of wealth, it's about creating wealth. It's creating intergenerational wealth through entrepreneurship that is driven in a highly localized and neighborhood way and in a coordinated way. And so to your point, Jennifer, your chamber, which predominantly represents the Hispanic business community, Steve's chamber predominantly represents the African American community, Nick Shenoy, the Asian chamber, Zach Wilka, who leads our LGBTQ association, the Independent Business Alliance. We all work very closely together because it dawned on us a couple of years ago, by the way, pre-pandemic, that together we could provide catalytic and coordinating leadership between the government, between these local community interests, between a whole myriad and host of really strong not-for-profit technical assistance intermediaries, and large-scale employers in the private sector. We got a lot of work to do in terms of coordination, but I think what has happened by our chambers working together is that we are helping those that come at this problem and this opportunity through a narrow slice to see where we need to connect the dots. And also to demonstrate to folks that maybe don't spend a lot of time in commercial corridors that the interrelationship of the storefront enterprise that's well lit and clean and safe is also tied to shopping carts being left in people's front yards, anchor institutions making commitments to procure from these Black and brown enterprises, particularly those in proximity, and in a time of scarce public resources, making this a priority and the resources available in the city of Philadelphia through those corridor managers. Last estimate, I think, by the downtown, by Paul Levy's group, the Center City District, indicated that less than 5% of the total public outlay, the total city budget, goes to programs encouraging growth and wealth creation and entrepreneurship. And so we're all united that needs to be, in a time of scarce resources, let's make that a priority, because that is about creating intergenerational wealth in our community, and through all ethnic groups and races.
And yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's been 2 years in which the ethnic chambers and the greater chamber have been meeting on a periodic basis to really talk about the issues that matter to each of our constituencies and to find certain alignment. And I think this is a place where clearly we are aligned. It's important that we support our commercial corridors. And so one of the things that I think about, and we're hearing from our folks, is that, the city has made outdoor dining and extended and made it so much easier to apply for this permits, right? And that is just adding vibrancy to our commercial corridors at a time in which they are just really needing activity as well. And I've been told that so I wonder, if Stephen Bradley, I'm doing the third call, I've been told he's available. I'm wondering, Steve, if you are with us today, what is the outlook and what is the African American Chamber's take on the work in commercial corridors? Are you with us before I continue asking the question? Well, it looks like his availability is he has dropped, unfortunately, from the call. So part of what I was going to ask Steve is the 53rd commercial corridor here in the city of Philadelphia, went through a social unrest, and I was going to ask him about what efforts were undergoing in order to really make significant change, not only to repair the damage, but really to sustain and really improve that commercial corridor. And I know that there is a great, a new announcement that I read in the paper that an entrepreneur had partnered with a developer, and they're looking to create a hub of entrepreneurship around around West Philadelphia, which I think is a fantastic opportunity. But going back, since we don't have Stephen right now with us, going back, I am really also curious on your take, Rob, on that same study that from Center City District that really look at the density of Black and Brown entrepreneurs in our city. What is the conversation inside the chamber as it relates to this sort of report coming out recently?
So by the way, you can't have these conversations around race without a whole lot of humility, and the conversations need to be difficult. And in that awful weekend, when I say awful, the heinous acts by the Minneapolis police that then led to a weekend of national protests that continue to this date, the leadership of our organization have been in many a difficult conversation with humility around race, because we want to get through this pandemic, social and economic unrest over the next 10 years in a way in which we don't squander the opportunity, perhaps like we did in the previous 10 years, where we're not integrating our resources and defining leadership differently. We need to do so that we don't create even more inequity and in a wider gulf between the haves and the have-nots. And that's particularly important for the future of the city of Philadelphia, because Philadelphia is a minority-majority city, if not completely will be and will continue to be so. And so to have this complete misalignment where you have a non-white demographic profile for the city and growing, and particularly in Black and Brown enterprises being so lacking at the bottom of every list in terms of the density of entrepreneurship from Black and Brown enterprises, it just doesn't, it doesn't make sense, and B, it does not bode well for the future of the city. And we need to address that with a whole lot of short-term actions. For example, as part of an effort we're involved in with the city government and your chamber and others, the Philadelphia Regional Recharge and Recovery Initiative, we're asking employers to double, triple, and quadruple down on their local spend with emphasis on Black and brown small businesses to do so freely. You don't need to pass a law in Washington, go do it, just go do it. And we know many of our large anchor institutions are figuring out how to do that as we speak, and there'll be some announcements forthcoming in the next several weeks. So there's things we got to do right now tactically, but also I think it really requires a reframe around growth and not just redistribution or subsidy, right? And we've created a bit of an echo chamber as it relates to the public arena of ideas, where the rhetoric is around race and the elimination of systematic racism, but it feels like conversations around the importance of entrepreneurship, the importance of free enterprise, the importance of intergenerational wealth creation have been kind of lost, particularly in recent months around this subject. And we're imploring in our conversations back to the chamber and externally, those that are in positions of authority, whether public authority, private resources at their command, to put that back into the public debate and dialogue. There shouldn't be an antagonistic binary argument that in the name of social justice, the best that we can do is redistribute to provide more public subsidy. That gives you diminishing returns on a macroeconomic basis, particularly where you don't have the density of African American and Latino enterprises in the city of Philadelphia. Strategically, we're going to say, yeah, that's part of it, but also part of it is creating headroom, if you will, so these micro enterprises, these are large businesses, it doesn't matter, but particularly those that are Black and brown, can start up, restart up, grow and expand and flourish. And that's a more of a strategic, longer term conversation that we just think is so critical to the future of the city.
And I think that's a very important point for those that are not from Philadelphia. There's a report that just recently came out that basically, and I'm not going to throw a lot of numbers out, but basically said that when you compare business enterprises of color to white enterprises, the discrepancy in the creation of businesses is really great. So one of the things that we know is that only about 2% of Latino-owned businesses generate $1 million or more in sales, right? And that what that really means is that about 90+ percentage of Latino-owned businesses are really micro businesses, are 2 people, 3 people businesses. And really there is a real need to follow what you said around really supporting the growth of businesses. So there are too many self-employed and too many micro businesses. And how do we collectively work to grow them so that instead of employing 2 people, they employ 5, 7 people. Instead of employing, 7 people, they go to grow to 20 people. And I think that is a conversation that is relatively new in the city of Philadelphia, because so much of what we have been talking about is really supplier diversity and increasing minority participation in contracts. But really, how do you do that? You do that, the easiest way to do that is by ensuring that you have strong enough businesses of color that can naturally compete for those opportunities, while at the same time really working on the institutional and governmental entities to break down the barriers and to facilitate the opportunities, right?
Yeah, and Jennifer, people are probably wondering now, wait, is this a BPHL? Where's the innovation come into this program? It's exactly on the last point that you just suggested. And one of the things that we've learned since the pandemic is the tools necessary to build the financial tools for enterprises to succeed need to be modernized to reach a different type of community. And we saw this with the PPP program. We get it. Banks did the right thing by moving first to their customer base, and CDFIs worked quickly with whatever federal dollars could flow through to provide grants. But I think where innovation will play to help address the issue that you just really succinctly and perfectly laid out is in that space. What are the new ways to create equity in enterprises? What are the new financial tools that the banking industry should be thinking about, products, if you will, that will support particularly Black and brown enterprises in the city going forward? What do the apps look like? I mean, there's a whole lot of opportunity there. We talked to a number of micro businesses back in the June timeframe that said, look, can I interact with my bank via text? That's my technology of choice. Well, I don't know, right? So it may not necessarily have to be cutting edge innovation, but the broad topic of innovation should be applied to this particular part of the subject.
And I think, innovation in financial products. I think I hear Stephen.
Yes.
Stephen, is that you?
He was on.
I think he was on for a second there, right? But in that sense, creating new products that are flexible capital products that are accessible to entrepreneurs of color is one of the things that we have been increasingly talking about. And finally, we think that we're really excited that people are paying attention. So I think this is a moment in which we are going to start taking questions from the audience. So, there's a question here around immigrants and immigrant contributions. And it says, immigrants have been the reason for the revival of some neighborhoods in the past 20 years. What are the chambers doing to ensure immigrants are included in the efforts talked about today? From our perspective, in my past life, I was incredibly blessed to be the executive director of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs in the city of Philadelphia, Immigrant and Multicultural Affairs under the previous administration. And one of the things that there was a study at that time that came out that basically stated that between 2007 and 2013, 95, if not more, the overwhelming majority of new businesses created in our main streets, in our neighborhood commercial corridors, were created by immigrants, because immigrants, they're made of resiliency. I mean, that's at the very, very core of the characteristics of the immigrant community. And they see hope with others see despair, right? So we think about the Italian market. And when I moved to Philadelphia in the 1990s, and I'm waiting to hear your story on this, Rob. When I moved to Philadelphia in the late 90s, the Italian market was really depressed. It was a place that people were wondering, what is the future going to be of this formerly vibrant economic engine for South Philadelphia? And lo and behold, today, immigrants have come in and have revitalized and reinvested. And we have some of the richest and best foods and stores and commerce there. And now it's become a very desirable place to be. So Rob, what is your take on really supporting or the role of immigrants in our economy?
Sure. Well, this isn't a recent phenomenon. Philadelphia has always been, I think, a very friendly destination for immigrants. The immigration patterns in our city, though, in this early century, are really driven by airline routes that fly in and out of Philadelphia. So that's why you will see, now and projected more immigrants coming up through Latin America, Eastern Europe, et cetera. And then ultimately, I think you'll see a slight resurgence in the Pacific Rim. But it's just hard to get back and forth. A lot of immigrant families, as you know well, Jennifer, are moving back and forth to their home countries. And it's often driven by affordable and available flights out of the airport, in our case, Philadelphia Airport. By the way, I love your word picture on the Italian market, because now the delicacies are Cambodian and Laos and French and Czechoslovakia and Northern European, et cetera. So it's no longer just the Italian market, if you will, anymore. We bought our first property in Philadelphia in the mid-1980s in Northern Liberties, 1986, if I remember correctly. And Northern Liberties back then is not at all like the Northern Liberties today, except for one binding characteristic, and that was the immigrant population. Our neighbors were primarily Ukrainian, Czechoslovakian, German. It was sort of that early 20th century wave of immigration, grandfathers, grandmothers, sons and grandsons and granddaughters. And so now you go to Northern Liberties, it's a composite of the world in terms of ethnicity and immigration. I don't think we do. I think we're okay as a city in being friendly to immigrant entrepreneurs. Our chamber has a nascent partnership with the Welcoming Center for Pennsylvanians, which is all about immigration entrepreneurship, led by the very capable Peter Gonzalez. It's a very intense, hands-on effort to have someone who has a skill set around a certain enterprise or entrepreneurial bent that has come from one country to this country. Peter's organization does a great job in that, in trying to work through the tenets of entrepreneurship. To be really candid, and Jennifer, I know you see this firsthand as well, a lot of immigrants would just rather operate in the underground economy, the dark economy, the unreportable economy, if you will. And so, that's no way to run an enterprise. It also doesn't have a net positive on the government. I think on lists, if lists matter, I think we're kind of right in the middle of the pack of big cities that embrace immigrant entrepreneurs. I know there's organizations that are working through this. I think this administration, our Commerce Director, Sylvia Gallagher Howard, and Harold Epps before her, there's a lot of credit to trying to figure this out from even something as simple as translation services. It's not that simple it sounds simple when you say it, but it's definitely not simple put in practice.
As somebody that used to oversee.
But I got to say, I think I wouldn't say we're doing great, but we're not bad either. We're kind of right in the middle now with a lot of room for improvement.
Yes, and one of the things in the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, one of the things that we pride ourselves, of course, is that we are, bilingual, bicultural, right? So a lot of the work that we do, while English might be the dominant language in recent months, particularly under this economic conditions, we are becoming increasingly aware of the needs of immigrant communities, particularly around language and access, right? So at the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, we have created, we received a donation of $15,000 and with that, we are seeding a relief fund, one more relief fund amongst many relief funds, but the focus of this fund will be to support primarily immigrant-owned businesses, because we know that those are the businesses less likely to apply and or be successful in receiving funding, because many times of their mixed immigrant status, they might not be eligible for that funding. We're also right now promoting Restaurant Week, Dine Latino Restaurant Week, and the majority of the restaurants that have signed up are owned by immigrants. And so we are providing to them technical assistance for marketing, social media, for operations. We're bringing a restaurant expert that speaks Spanish so that she can really support these businesses when they are as they try to grow and make it through the pandemic. We do have a second question. And I know, Rob, you are somebody that is constantly searching the world and the country for inspiration. Where do you get the inspiration when it comes to innovating programs and ideas that bring you to increase diversity and inclusion, or really even just improving the economic conditions here in the city of Philadelphia?
By the way, I thought we were going back. when you were saying searching the country, I thought you were going to say because I'm internally lost, and would lose my head if it wasn't attached, as my mom used to say.
No, I'm talking about best practices and folks that are doing it right.
Yeah. So
and bringing
this
people
is what
together.
I wouldn't over-engineer. This is what I wouldn't over-engineer or make overly complex. As you and I started with our own stories on this journey around diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think storytelling now in our visual age is really important. And if you could be in the right conversations, I'm going to touch on that as the second point in a moment, where then you can actually have a dialogue and have contemplative thought around that dialogue, you'll have your own personal and organizational epiphany on how to do things differently to shed off the old and discriminatory behavior and practices and embrace the new. So that's the first point. The second point, you can only do that is if you wake up every morning bound and determined to be in conversations with people that are different than you, that think differently, look differently, act differently, have a different social and economic journey, that you need to put yourself into very uncomfortable, non-traditional situations, to use corporate parlance. And actually, maybe you need to do that first before you do listening. And look, that's hard work, because right now we're in an age, and this is my editorial comment, but we are in an age where people listen with their eyes and they think with their feelings. And to really, really address this in a way that is going to be beneficial for all, in a way that is equitable and growth and inclusive and inviting, really requires a different frame in that regard. You need to spend time listening and learning and acting, and not reacting or challenging or judging or seeing something and making a decision or driving something towards an outcome based on pure emotion. Anyone will tell you that innovation, broadly speaking, is a process of trial and error. I don't care what business or industry you're in, it's trial and error, and it's based on data and analysis. Very few times does innovation occur with the light bulb went off and a bright light hit the inventor, and the next thing you know, the whole world changed. No, most organizations that are on a path to continuous innovation do so through just dogged trial and error. They learn from the data and the analysis. By the way, that requires thinking, conversation, talking, not just reacting based on emotion or a visual age or additive. So, I get my inspiration really by having really interesting conversations with folks that have different life experiences. And I do so with a lot of humility, and then say, okay, that's interesting. How can we make that so here in my little part of the neighborhood?
And again, this is Stephen Bradley. I've been working very closely with Rob. Say it again.
Welcome. So, Steve, where do you get your inspiration, and where do you get ideas that influence the work of the chamber in really increasing diversity, or in this case, I would say improving the conditions and the outcomes for enterprises, Black enterprises?
I mean, I've always been motivated by what you do to the least of these. So I am my brother's keeper, and working with people like yourself, Jennifer, and working with Rob, that just gives me hope and inspiration. And again, if you're out in the community, whether you're at a barber shop or whether you're driving through West Philly, people need hope. And I just think more than we work collectively, the more that we can make an impact. And again, if we continue to work together and being willing to be uncomfortable but challenge each other, as long as we keeping our eyes on the prize, I think we can make an impact. And that's what the community, and that's what businesses need. That's what young entrepreneurs need. That's what these students in school need. And, you know, I always motivate myself by being part of the solution, and working with partners like you. You know, it just gives me inspiration to press forward.
Thank you. In my case, in the case of the Hispanic Chamber, I do a lot of research. I am really intrigued by the work of the Kauffman Foundation, which is, I think, the only nonprofit foundation really focused around entrepreneurship. And I think that the research and the programs and the work that they highlight are really interesting. They do fund a lot of experimental, if you will, or innovative programs. And to Rob's point, the idea of really trying something, not just for the sake of trying. I mean, I think we are all responsible sort of professionals, organizations here, but not to be afraid to do something new. So at the Hispanic Chamber, for example, very early on in the pandemic, we knew, because we've been in this world for quite a while, and economic development for a while, we knew that restaurants were going to be significantly impacted. And so we created a campaign that we called Dine Latino Takeout Weekend. And so the idea was that what better way to help restaurants today than supporting them? And so we are raising awareness around helping Latino-owned restaurants around the city and the region by telling everybody, if it's the weekend, it's Dine Latino Takeout Weekend. And so we have this ongoing campaign, really raising awareness.
That's
do I hear
something we
you,
have
Steve,
done
again?
also with. That's something we have also done with the African American restaurants, and we've been fortunate. We got a grant recently, and we decided to earmark all the grant money to help restaurants in the African American community. So we're giving like $1,000 grants for that same purpose. But again, Hispanic restaurants have gotten a lot of good PR, and it's challenged us to really be more sensitive and more responsive to African American restaurants. So your leadership says a lot, because it's definitely helped out in African American restaurant business with curbside and everything, to try to make sure those businesses stay vibrant and stay part of the community.
Absolutely. And so we have another question coming from the audience, and this one is, what changes brought on by COVID do you think are here to stay? Rob or Stephen, can you hear me, Stephen, still?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So what in the way that you work, in the way that you see your membership and businesses work, what do you think is here to stay?
I think the whole idea of repurposing yourself and being able to pivot, I think those, you can kind of get comfortable in your lane. And I think if nothing else, we have learned how flexible we have to be, and how we always have to recreate our next innovative project. If you want to survive in this economy, you have to be on your game and on your toes, so that whether it's the next COVID or something else is going to occur, I think that's been a good lesson. And the strong will survive, and it's going to make some other entrepreneurs to repivot themselves. But I think it's been a tough learning curve. But I think, again, that working together, we're all going to survive this and move forward.
And Rob, what is here to stay with us in this space?
Well, that's a really good question. The virus is still behaving as it was when we first started hearing about it back in January. And I think that creates, human beings are creatures of habits and routines. Our routines have routines, and those routines have routines. And I think what the virus has done at a sort of metaphysical level is put a lot of uncertainty into our lives. And then some people are not motivated well by fear and uncertainty. Others are. But it's, in some respects, the great equalizer. Whether you're the CEO of a big publicly traded company or a micro Latino restaurant owner somewhere in a neighborhood in Philadelphia, we're all contending with the same uncertainty. And I think that actually has, in a weird kind of way, a binding effect, because we're kind of literally now all in this together, right? That's the first point. Second, because, and this is a staggering statistic, we lost close to 8% of the gross domestic product of our economy in just a couple of months as the federal, state, and local governments were locking down our economies because we had to understand the virus and fight it and flatten the curve in our ICUs and our healthcare system, all for the right reasons. I'm not making a judgment or questioning the actions at all. But whether you're a very large publicly traded company or that small African-American business or anything in between, a chamber of commerce, it doesn't matter. We've all been battered. Our balance sheets, our cash flow, our operations, our liquidity have all been battered in a very artificial way. And it's going to be slow to recover. And so we're all kind of in that same boat together, right? That we've got to strip away the silos that heretofore separated us and find innovative ways to collaborate, to create intergenerational wealth, to create more market opportunity. And I think what we're seeing already as a result of the pandemic and the way it happened so quickly, doing so now even more so digitally, remotely, virtually, et cetera. And that's also out of necessity. So those three elements combined, I actually share Steve and your optimism about what we're going to be able to do. And it's with us now, right? It's not going to go away anytime soon. And we shouldn't squander the moment. And we shouldn't squander the moment to build growth with equity.
And again, I don't think it's going to be an easy curve. So, my optimistic is not that it's going to be an easy curve and we're going to rebound easy. But I think we have to go in with that tenacity that we're going to work together and we're going to overcome it. But by no stretch of the word, my optimism is very cautiously that there's going to be some humps in the road and it's going to be a struggle. But again, as much as we work collectively, I think we're going to overcome some challenges and be able to pivot and make some new opportunities available.
When I think to the future and I think what are the things that are going to stay with us, I think this idea of working remotely, organizations, businesses are going to do the cost-benefit analysis of should I go in person or not? Should I send my team to that location or not? Is the conference a good use of my time or not? But in that calculation, I see a really bright future and bringing the conversation around for our neighborhood commercial corridors. Because to the extent that the workforce is more distributed and less centralized, at least to some degree, then there's a great opportunity for those of us that will be working from home more and more to really make this, go to the coffee shop and really do the kind of shopping or activities or commerce transactions we used to perform in our downtowns are now going to be also opportunities for those that are staying at home to really get out of the house just like you would have gotten out of your office, right? And do certain things. So I think that there might be, there's certainly going to be some changes. I think technology is here to stay with us. I think McKinsey, if I'm not misquoting, said that we have leaped in technology adaptation or engagement in technology. What would have taken us 5 or 6 years took us a few weeks, during the pandemic. That about 30% growth in e-commerce, right? So these are behaviors that are learned. We have now been doing them for weeks and weeks. So a behavior that you adopt and you repeat over weeks becomes permanent behavior. So I think there's some of that is here to stay, right, with us. One of the things that my challenge to the micro businesses, small businesses in communities of color is to get their business online. They are not enough minority or diverse owned businesses that have really taken the leap and fully adopted and maximized opportunities of being online. So I think that's a conversation in terms of talk about innovation, right? We talk about things that need to happen to ensure that these businesses remain viable and successful and grow. And I think that's a challenge that Rob and Steve, we should collectively work in making sure that we can bridge that digital divide not only at home, not only in the student body, but also with small businesses.
Especially in the restaurant
So,
business.
and we see that a lot, absolutely, in the restaurant business. And Steve, to that point, that is something that we are learning now with these Dine Latino campaigns that we have, is that the number of Latino restaurants that are on Yelp or are on Google are really not, and the ones that are, have not really developed really great websites. And that is what the consumer is expecting. And so I think we have a challenge cut out for us. I think it's an important one that we should be addressing. So we're sort of at the close to the end of our conversation today, and I'm wondering, Steve, as you look towards the end of the year, and the challenges that we're having in our communities with the small businesses, what is it that the African American Chamber of Commerce in the region, what is it that you're looking to do? What's next for you guys?
I mean, again, I think it's important that we continue to work closely with government, nonprofit organizations like the different chambers in the city, to make resources available and information available. I mean, information is a powerful tool, and I think as much as we continue to put that out for our memberships is crucial. I think as much as we hold our elected officials and our business leaders accountable is essential also. But I think that we have to collectively continue to work and try to solve these issues together as a team. And, a lot of people are watching and paying attention. And, with social media now, everything is so sensitive. But I think there's opportunities, but I think collectivity is crucial, that we continue on this journey together and continue these dialogues like this.
And so, Rob, as you look towards, I know the Greater Chamber is engaged in a number of big initiatives. As you look towards the end of the year, what is next for you and your chamber?
By the way, what Steve said is absolutely foundational to what we're doing. I couldn't agree with him more. And for us, the most overarching activity is the Philadelphia Regional Recharge and Recovery Initiative, where through your chamber, Steve's chamber, and a true partnership with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the counties of Bucks, Delaware, Montgomery, and Chester county governments, to Steve's point, the mayor and the council president here in Philadelphia, we organized about 140 business and civic leaders to build a plan so we could accelerate growth and recovery in and post-pandemic. And between now and the end of the year, the very, very short-term work has to be around building out the private-public infrastructure necessary for COVID-19 testing and contact tracing. And this infrastructure, as long as we have a virus that creates so much uncertainty, is absolutely necessary. It's necessary for employers and employees, for citizens, that transit is, that SEPTA is, in terms of infrastructure that is foundational for growth and economic activity. And so we've been spending a lot of time working with Governor Wolf and his team and others in building out the resources necessary for testing so the results are more timely, and then the tracing resources necessary to make it so. Also working with our federal and state and local officials, particularly our federal officials, in terms of the resources required to build out that testing and contact tracing infrastructure.
Critical if ultimately we're all going to have to transition and really get out of this really difficult situation. In terms of the Hispanic Chamber, well, it's Hispanic Heritage Month, and we're celebrating today with the BPHL. So we were looking to promote during this month, Hispanic businesses, our restaurant week coming up. Ultimately, we're working on updating our policy agenda. So stay tuned for the state of Hispanic business later towards the end of the year. And of course, but primary on our forefront is really supporting small businesses, giving them the resources, the tools, and really the access to the solutions that they need today. Because if we don't make it today, then really the next months of the pandemic, this is a real critical moment for small businesses in our region, regardless whether minority, diverse business or not. So we should really individually be very conscious and aware of how can we support our local economy. I would invite everybody to really have that present at the top of the mind. Let's really support our local businesses. With that, I really want to thank Steve. Thank you for joining us. I am glad that you're able to make it. Rob, thank you for being a great partner in crime today. And to the BPHL family and those that have joined us today, thank you so much. Hasta luego. Adios.
Take care.
Take care.
Adios.
Bye-bye.